This is my Clio 182, or how it used to look 3 years ago. My mission was to rectify all of the issues with this car and get it running and looking the way it deserved to. 3 years later, and this is currently what it looks like today. Allow me to explain. Guys, a different type of video for me today. I haven't actually done one of these before. I usually do cinematic car reviews, but I have a lot of cars myself and I'm always working on them, and one of them is the Clio 182. I've done a video on this before on my channel, and I did a video to explain what is actually wrong with the car, and that was like over a year ago. After spending money on the bodywork, the gearbox, the clutch and other little bits and bobs, I thought the car was almost ready to be a keeper, but then I hit a stroke of bad luck. As they say, bad things come in threes. At first I was hit by a van, and then second of all I gave it to a mechanic to do a gearbox change, and then he ended up crashing the car as well. And then on the way to get a new front end for this car, so new bonnets, bumpers and wing, I ended up blowing the engine on the M25. What had actually happened is the auxiliary belt had become damaged, partially snapping, jumping the timing belt, damaging a few wires and the cam cover housing. It's definitely not the first time someone has blown their Clio 182 engine in this way. So the car has been nothing but bad luck for me, unfortunately, and in the 5 or 6 years I've owned it, or I think 6 or 7 years I think now, I've only done 36,000 miles. It doesn't sound like a lot, it hasn't been that reliable. So I had two options: scrap the car or spend even more money on it. I think we know what I ended up doing. Determined not to give up, I started prepping the car for a new engine. Pretty soon I realised that working on the car in my driveway wasn't going to work, so I had the car sent to Dub Customs. The car sat for a long time, as I just didn't have the time to work on it. But soon I realised that if I spent a solid week on it, it would be up and running in no time. So I decided to get to work. While the engine was out, I gave the engine bay a nice clean with some degreaser and cleaned up the firewall and carpet. I also installed a missing power steering rack heat shield, as now was the perfect time to do it. Once all that was complete, the next step was to put in the new engine. So you join me today at Dub Customs, where the car is currently stored. They've been so kind enough to let me leave it here and work on it. But today we're hopefully going to get this car started. I've got the new engine in the car. I've just got to do the fluid, got to couple the downpipe to the exhaust catalytic converter, I think the ECU, the battery and the coolant and the radiators at the front. So those are the key parts to get this car started today, and once we do that I can't wait to turn the key. I'm going to be honest with you, the car has seen better days. Although it doesn't look like it, here is my new engine that actually came out of a 172. The only difference between the 172 engine and the 182 engine is the exhaust manifold and the inlet manifold and the cam cover actually as well. So you've got an oil breather which comes out here on the 172 engine, whereas on the 182 it kind of comes out the back. The catalytic converter is completely different the way it's set up. You've got two on the 172 that are right behind the engine, whereas on this you've got a downpipe straight to an external cap. In terms of a 182, in terms of modification and power and stuff like that, it gets its extra power from that change in manifold design, whereas this F4R engine is pretty much the same in every single way apart from that cam cover. I've tightened up the engine a little bit by spray painting the manifold, spray painting some of the mounts. I kind of wish I did the rest of the engine as well, but as you can see I just wanted to get this done. So here we've got the new gearbox mount, which is powder coated, which was given to me by the guy who sold me the engine. He gave me this mount as well, which was also powder coated. Really nice of him. And he also gave me like loads and loads of stuff, including like a new clutch and just other bits and bobs that it's nice to have spare. So it looks a mess right now, but all we need is the radiators installed with the pipes. We need the coolant bottle put over here. We need the ECU and we need the battery, and literally after that's all done and everything's piped up, all the fluids are in, we'll be able to start this car. Before we put the radiator in though, we're going to have to fill up this gearbox with some gearbox fluid. You can see the little filler cap there. So let's get started then. The gearbox oil first, then the power steering fluid. After that we've got to fit the coolant bottle to the firewall. Just connect a few of the pipes. Now the ECU needs to go in. The alternator cable needs to go in. This is looking great so far. The next thing we need to do is fill up the engine with some oil. So now we've topped up all the fluids, it's time to start the car, and I'm really excited for this. Everything was going super smoothly until we tried to start the car. As you can see, we had an issue. So what actually happened then? The fuel line burst, which means that the engine wouldn't start because there's no fuel pressure in the line, not to mention all of the fuel going everywhere. So we had to call it a day. So this brings us on to day 2, where we're going to sort out the fuel line issue and carry on working on the car, and hopefully at the end of today we can get this car started. Okay guys, so the first thing we've got to do is take off this front wheel and swap it with the rear wheel. The reason why we have to take off the tyre is because it keeps on going flat, and with the weight of the engine it's just only going to keep doing it. Replacing it with the one at the rear means it's not going to go as flat as often. So now that we've swapped the wheels over, the next step is for me to fix a few issues on this side of the car. So the first thing is the radiator needs to be replaced because it was leaking when we put water through it, and that's really annoying because I thought I could salvage the old radiator. However, Autodoc were having a sale, so I was able to get a new one for relatively cheap. So we're going to swap that one over. A little bit tedious to do because of the pipes and stuff, but it shouldn't take too long. The next step is for us to undo the dog bone mount at the bottom of the car, the engine mount, and get access to the auxiliary belt. Now, the thing is with the auxiliary belt on this car is that it requires a tensioner like pretty much every other car. The downside is the tool for the tensioner is expensive and it often breaks, and the other way to get access to it is a bit awkward. I find the best thing to do is take the engine mount off the car, jack the engine up from the sump, take the tensioner off completely, put it into a vise to apply the tension, use a Jubilee clip, drop the alternator down as well to relieve even more tension, put the belt on the system, and then assemble it all back together, detension the Jubilee clip, and you've got a full tension system. It's been a year since this engine has last ran, and I just want to see this car back into its former glory so that we can have some more adventures with it. So hopefully once all that's done, we can hear it run for the first time. So as I was working on assembling the new radiator, we immediately lost daylight and the temperature dropped quite significantly, so we had to move the car inside. We are determined today to get this car started, and that's exactly what we're going to do. Now, we just finished rebuilding the radiator. So as you can see, we've got the fan on it now, it's all built up. We've literally just got to put it in the car, do a few final checks, put some water in it, see if it leaks, and if not, we're going to start it up. This is how we're looking so far before the radiator goes in. So done the engine mounts all up again. We've got the belt all in there nicely, all tensioned up. Turned out to be a lot easier than I thought. Didn't have to do much to get that working, but that's all good. Everything underneath is all connected apart from the exhaust. So the center section needs to be done. Once that's done, this car is going to be near enough complete from a mechanical perspective. So I think that's it. The radiator's fitted now. I think all we need to do is put some water in this thing to see if it leaks, and fingers crossed it doesn't. Okay, so it looks like we've got some good news. The water seems to be holding, and although I've only put in like 3 litres, I know it needs more. What we're going to do is we're going to put a battery in the car, we're going to start it, and hopefully that cycles the system and gets the water through it quicker, and then we can add more water, and then hopefully we know that there's no leaks from the radiator and that we're good to go on that. So let's do it, let's start her up. The first thing I need to do is put a battery in, so luckily we have one lying around here. So that should go in no problem. I'll make some space for it. You'll notice we haven't actually connected the aircon on this car yet, but we're gonna do that later if everything else works. We've got to get a plus right, so as long as I put that in there. Hopefully this has enough juice. And finally, the moment we've been waiting for. And the battery's dead. So let's get another battery and try this again. And this one's dead too. Okay, let's get another one and try it again. I'm losing count of all the batteries we've used, but let's try another one. Okay, this one's not going to work. Let's get another one and hopefully this one works. And there we have it guys, the car actually started and it looks like everything is working okay. The fuel line hasn't exploded, but the next thing, we need to put it into gear and see if it can reverse out of the unit. I must admit this was a very nerve-wracking experience, but as you can see it worked with no issues. Thank you guys for watching and I can't wait for part 2 where we continue to restore the Clio 182 back to its former glory.